Good point.
Okay, we're all set.
Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the Operations and Services Reopening Work Group. For this June 4th, 2020 meeting is being called to order at 5 p.m. electronically. On June 2020, Governor Carney issued a declaration of a state of emergency for the state of Delaware due to the public health threat. The state of emergency allows all public meetings of executive branch public bodies, including the Delaware COVID-19 Operations and Services Reopening Work Group, to be conducted electronically by means of telephone conference call or video conference call. The information regarding this meeting, including information on how to access the meeting electronically, was published on May 27, 2020, on the state public meeting calendar site. Individuals may participate in this meeting via the YouTube channel, the DOE YouTube channel publicized on the agenda. Also, if you go to the state public meeting calendar site, you can see the slides for tonight's meeting. They are listed on that calendar as document. These meetings are public meetings to provide transparency and the opportunity for the public to engage in the process. In order to enable every participant to have a voice in the process, public comment will be accepted by email at reopening.ideas@doe.k12.de.us or via voicemail at 302-735-4244. All comments and ideas will be forwarded to the respective work groups for review and posted on DOE's reopening page on the DOE website as well. Next slide, please. Here's a brief view of our agenda tonight. All right. I am the co-chair, one of the co-chairs, Chuck Longfellow from Delaware Department of Education. I am Associate Secretary of Operations Support, supporting various functions such as transportation, technology, capital construction, finance, logistics, and there's another one that I always, charter school operation or charter school authorizations. The other co-chair is Oliver Gums. So I'll let him introduce himself.
Good evening. I am Oliver Gums. I work for the Cape Canaveral School District, where I am the Director of Business Operations. I've been here for 13 years. I have 28 years of financial, administrative, operations experience within the state of Delaware, within state agencies also. Look forward to working with everyone and making sure that we do a good job on this.
All right. And Andrew Buer.
Thanks, Chuck. I'm Andrew. First and foremost, two little girls. I am also Managing Director of Opportunity Labs, which is a national nonprofit organization. We are currently supporting return to school planning implementation in states across the country, serving 7 million students.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. So some of the ground rules for tonight, we want to ensure that everyone has a chance to speak, everyone has a voice, everyone has a perspective. We want to respect all opinions, honor multiple perspectives. We want to be focused on our purpose, be succinct. We have a lot of stuff to go through and not much time to do it. Use the hand raise feature. The folks participating in the committee are on WebEx, and we have a hand raise that we'll use. And we understand that compromise may be necessary. You know, a couple other things to bring in. Next slide, please. Is that we welcome public comment. We know that we couldn't possibly bring in every constituency group into the committee. We only have a limited number of space. You know, it wouldn't be practical to have a committee of 1,000, but you know, we do know that we have a lot of expertise out there. So please, if you want to react to something that we have in the draft framework here, please email us at reopeningideas@doe.k12.de.us or send us a voicemail, and we will definitely be able to see that. We'll distribute those to the work groups. The comments will be posted on DOE's reopening page. If you go to the www.doe.k12.de.us, you'll find a reopening link, and we already have the comments posted from last Thursday's public meeting, and you'll see comments every week in a spreadsheet there. So I think we strive to post those every Friday. Next, we're going to go to introductions. Next slide, please. And so also wanted to just say to the members of the committee, you all represent different groups, different constituencies, you have different experience. Please bring that experience here. We also know that you're part of other groups. Bring this information to your groups. We definitely want as much input on this as we can get. So thank you for that. And I'd like to go down the list here and have each member give a brief introduction of yourself, what you do and what constituencies you represent. So Heath.
Yeah. Heath Chasanoff, Superintendent of the Woodbridge School District in Sussex County, Delaware.
Sherry Kioski, Principal of Caesar Rodney High School.
We have David Hearn. I know he's on here.
Caught asleep. I was in the on-deck circle and fell asleep. David Hearn, I'm at Delmar High School. I'm a driver's ed teacher, athletic director, head football and baseball coach for a bunch of years, and wear a bunch of hats there.
I'm Stacy Clark. I am Director of Instruction and Student Services at First State Military, and I have 2 sons in high school as well. My background is I was principal, school counselor, and elementary teacher, so I come with that knowledge as well.
I'm Natasha Rivera. I am the transportation supervisor with the Seaford School District in Sussex County.
Good evening, Gerald Allen, Director of School Operation and Personnel for Newcastle County Protect School District.
I am Christine Bewley. I'm the manager.
Christine, we lost you a little bit. Can you tell us everything after I am Christine Bewley?
I'm sorry. I'm Christine Bewley. I'm the manager of information systems for the Red Clay Consolidated School District. I oversee the technology office, school choice office, and student data.
All right, Ms. Wright.
Go ahead, Lagola, you can talk now. Oh,
Just there we go.
there she goes.
Hi, Ms. Wright.
Yes.
You are a school board member.
Sorry, I thought it went. I'm Leaga Wright, Indian River School District School Board member.
Excellent. Don't know if Mary Nash is here yet. Mary Nash. Not. She'll be here as soon as they wrap up with the Joint Finance Committee. Jeff Tashner. You want to introduce yourself? He's there. He is executive director or something like that of the Delaware State Education Association.
Chuck, can you hear me?
Can now, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm on the phone mic. So I'm Jeff Tashner. I'm the executive director at DSEA. Thanks, Chuck.
You're welcome. All right, Mr. Williams, go ahead.
Yep, I'm Mike Williams. Parent of three, two in Christina, one in Red Clay, and I'm also a member with the Delaware State PTA.
All right, down the list, Representative Jakes.
Earl Jakes, Chair of the House Education Committee. And just finished doing the budget with JFC. We're done.
Dave Sokola, State Senator, 8th District. I have both Christina and Red Clay in my district.
Charles Postles, representative for the 33rd District. I'm on the Education Committee. Been a school board member years ago, and I'm a farmer by occupation.
All right. And Senator Lawson. Do we have him on? Not sure.
I don't think he's on yet.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go on to the next slide, and Oliver will take over. Oh, go ahead. Is he here?
Not yet.
All right. All right, Oliver.
So the purpose of this committee is to deliver a high-level framework to the Secretary of Education that includes public health considerations to help superintendents, charter leads, and principals in their planning work. This committee will not make recommendations about whether schools should open for in-person instruction. That is a decision that will be made by the governor and the public health experts. Next slide, please. This framework will include recommendations on what needs to be done. The how details are outside of our scope of the committee. However, your comments and public comments will be available to those making the how decisions. Review the scenario-based planning document in the context of operations and services. The planning documents are not set in stone and are meant to be edited to meet our needs to shape this for what we need in Delaware. Next slide. So our assignment recap is today's meeting is we're going to discuss scenario number 1, which is focused on minimal spread. The next meeting, next 2 meetings will be dedicated to scenario number 2, which is minimal to moderate spread. The 25th of June, we'll discuss scenario number 3, which is substantial spread. July 2nd is the target date for our final recommendations. Before each meeting, it's our responsibility to read the scenario materials and public comment. Next slide.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here, Oliver. Thanks. So as our co-chairs noted, this committee's charge is to provide recommendations to the secretary that support the efficiency of operations within the context of an uncertain public health situation. And so the starting point for our conversation is to understand how the public health situation may unfold, because that will in turn help us understand how school opening scenarios might play out. So best-in-class public health experts generally agree that there are 3 pandemic scenarios that could play out nationally over the next 18 to 24 months. Of course, this might change if a vaccine or a high-efficacy treatment becomes available. So we just wanted to go through each of these in a little bit of detail. The first is peaks and valleys. And basically that means that the first wave of COVID that is occurring now in spring 2020 is a representative wave, and several follow-on outbreaks of similar scale and duration would occur. The second scenario is called the fall peak. And that basically means that the spring 2020 wave of COVID-19 that we are currently experiencing is the smaller wave, with the second more severe wave coming in the fall of 2020. And then the third scenario that could potentially play out from a national perspective is what epidemiologists refer to as slow burn. And it basically means that the first wave in spring 2020, the wave that we are currently experiencing, is the most severe wave, but the outbreak will continue on a slow burn in the population at a lower moderate level. And so we think this is really helpful context But to begin to understand how this will influence school opening, planning, implementation decisions, we also need to understand how the coronavirus may manifest locally. Alyssa, you can go to the next slide. So this framework is built on the CDC's definition of minimal, moderate, and significant community spread. A few quick notes before talking through the local community spread scenarios themselves. So R naught, this little R with a zero next to it, is basic reproductive number, which effectively means the average number of new infections from one infected person. R naught is it's not a fixed number. It's a jumping off point really that's influenced by many factors, including human behavior, but it's a really good proxy for the level of disease in a community. And so as we get to thinking about how COVID may be manifesting locally in communities this fall, there's essentially three ways. The first is none to minimal. And basically that means that there's very few, if any, active COVID-19 cases locally, with the R naught significantly less than 1, meaning that on average, every person with COVID-19 is infecting less than 1 person. And so basically in that scenario, the disease will decline and eventually die out. This corresponds to late phase 2 to phase 3 of the Delaware reopening plan. And in that community spread scenario, schools would be open. There will certainly be a number of essential actions and protocols for folks to consider across functional areas at the district and school level, but schools would be open and operating. The next community spread scenario is the minimal to moderate scenario. And basically that means that the R naught is close to or equal to 1, with a pretty significant amount of circulating disease in the given geographic area. This level of community spread corresponds to phase 1 to 2 of the Delaware reopening plan. It's actually where Delaware is as of June 1st. And school status will be situation dependent. Likely some combination of schools opening with social distancing protocols and or remote learning. And then the last community spread scenario is what epidemiologists refer to as substantial community spread. And this basically means case counts have increased or accelerated rapidly, and the R naught is significantly greater than 1. And we would likely see state leaders decide to move Delaware backwards on the reopening plan. In that scenario, school status is that they would be closed and operating remotely. And so we thought it was important just to sort of ground this conversation in the public health scenarios, because the operational issues that we are going to consider today are relevant only to the minimal and moderate community spread scenario. And then as we progress over the next couple of weeks, we will be talking about those same operational issues in each of the sequential community spread scenarios. So with that, I'm happy to pass it back to Chuck to dive into the discussion component of the conversation.
Okay, thank you. So tonight we're talking about what we called scenario 1, no to minimal community spread. It should be one of the easier nights. I'm sure our next meetings will be a little tougher to discuss. So the way that the framework is broken out is the 3 scenarios, which no to minimal spread, moderate spread, and significant or substantial spread. There also we also have 4 different protocols in each of those areas, which are facilities, operations, transportation, and technology. Operations includes a few different things, including budget, food, enrollment, and staffing. And then within each of those 4 protocols, we have timeframes. One of those is due now. The next one is before school opens. And the other one is when schools are open and operating. But remember, we're just trying to figure out in our framework what to do. We're not the folks who are the ones who figure out how to do everything. We have experts in schools who do that. We have experts in the health community who can help us with that. I mean, we can certainly, if it's something that has to be said, it can be said. But really what we're trying to do in our framework and our recommendation to the secretary are what to do. So please consider these 3 questions in all of these lists. What should be added to this list of essential actions? Did we miss something? Should any essential actions be deprioritized? Is it something that's just really not important to be in this framework? And then should we move any of them within the timeframes? Did we put something as due now, which really should be when schools are open and operating? Or did we do before school opens, but it really needs to be done now? So please think of those 3 questions as we go through these protocol lists. So with that, next slide. The first one we'll look at is facilities. So I was able to distribute to the committee the list of slides ahead of time. And as I said before, those of you who are watching via YouTube, you can get to it through the public calendar, the Delaware Public Meetings calendar. Click on the link for tonight's meeting, and you'll see the document, a link to the PDF of the slides. So you can follow along too if you'd like to. So we have 5 slides that are dealing with facilities. So what I would like Alyssa to do is, we'll stare at this one for a little bit. We'll give it a little time. We'll go through each of the 5, and then we'll come back to 13, and then we'll discuss. We'll see if anybody has any ideas or answers to the questions, what needs to be added, what needs to be moved, and so forth. So take a look. Yes.
Chuck, before we get started with that, I think Oliver has a comment to make or a question.
Before we actually got into the facilities portion of it, if you could go back to slide 12, it would be good to take a pause here and get people's feedback to make sure we have everything that we want on the list to discuss in these scenarios. So my question to the committee is facilities, operations, transportation, and technology good enough for the list, or should we add some things, or should there be some things taken off? So I'll open the floor for some feedback on that.
Jeff, go ahead.
Thanks. Chuck and Oliver, the one question I have here is, I know in a lot of the conversations that have been going on, the issue of related services, especially in regards to our children with special needs, is one that comes up often. That has been a challenge in the remote learning environment. And just, is related services included somewhere within this list, or is it being addressed by one of the other work groups? Because I think we need to be mindful of how that plays out throughout all of these scenarios, if that makes sense.
I'll take a stab at that. We have a diverse committee with varied backgrounds and special needs students and related service students. All of those services for them do fall into all of these categories. Some of us operate special schools like myself, where we have to take those things into consideration on how all of these groups we're talking about affect those students. Same thing for operations, transportation. We have a special fleet of buses and drivers specifically for that special school. Those needs are different than what you have for your regular school transportation. Technology goes without saying. We do need to take all of those things into consideration, and part of my background, because I deal with that, will make sure that we look at some of that, but I will lean on the committee for feedback on those things.
And I know we're called operations and services, so I could see why you'd have that question. Let me ask Andrew, in the framework, the draft framework that we have, where does related services for students with special educational needs go? Which group does that fit in?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is it's one of these issues that straddles a number of the committees, right? It is wellness consideration. It is certainly instructional consideration in many instances, and there's operational perspectives to that work too. So so there are component decisions and I think essential actions that each of the committees will be considering relative to related services and provision of related services.
All right.
Chuck, we have one more. Dave Sokola, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. One of the documents I was reviewing previously, and I think it was from the National Conference of State Legislatures, had recommended that facilities be used differently. And for instance, classes could be, where possible, in gymnasiums and outside. And it occurred to me when we were reviewing that would that would require some discussion around security. And I'm not sure if that's some other group that's working on that, or if that's something that we also may want to put a little asterisk on for how we're using facilities.
That is a good point. Security is part of operations, but I think we do need to put that on there as part of our considerations, just to make sure that we do our due diligence related to that. The other thing about facilities and all of this, if they start talking hybrids and doing things differently with buildings, a lot of buildings are at capacity, and they may not be feasible on be able to do those things. But again, we're here to talk about the what. The how is going to be what the decision makers in the individual districts are going to have to figure out how to make that work. And then it's going to be challenging for all 19 districts and the charter schools to kind of make some of those scenarios happen.
All right. Any more hands at this point?
We just had one more. Stacy, go ahead.
Hi, I think I'm a little confused on the definition of no to minimal community spread. I see on here it says can open and operate normally. So can you just clarify what normally is so that I can understand what we are looking for? Please, thank you.
Yeah, normally just means in-person instruction. We obviously recognize that there's going to be a lot of changes that need to happen across all functional areas in school, but normally in this case just means in-person instruction can happen. Does that help, Stacy?
It does, and I guess I need even a little more clarity on what our guidelines are going to be that we're following under, right? So if we are 15 in a classroom, okay, and I think, the normal, I think of normal as a sitting on a dryer, not people, but what do we do, what do we do with this? Could you just give me a few more guidelines? I'm trying to think of, because I don't know. I mean, a normal in some classes, it's 25, some they're 35. And we're walking in and out of the building. Are we looking at proposing our open full operation? Everybody's in the building on this one? If you could help me out, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is the core question that the Wellness Committee is considering, thinking very carefully about what those protocols from a public health perspective should look like. I think our committee will begin to consider them more substantively next week when we talk about the minimal to moderate community spread scenario, where there are, significant social distancing protocols that are needed. And so I think next week, one, you will see more information about everything from sort of scheduling to implementing social distancing protocols, and two, the actual guardrails around social distancing protocols are not only a public health decision, but also the Wellness Committee is working closely with public health, who is represented on that committee, to make sure that they are setting the pretext for those decisions. So it's a hard question to answer, to think about, what normal looks like without really knowing what the public health guardrails are. But that's sort of where we are, Stacy.
Okay, so, I mean, just throwing it out to the team, then perhaps we're looking at, returning to no social distancing and none of those protocols in place. And maybe we look at the kids, our students, and our teachers, because we don't want to forget our staff either, who have some health needs and things like that. Is that maybe where this one would come in?
Yeah, there's some points later on during this scenario where you'll see things like what to do about teachers or staff who don't come back or and so forth. So yeah, as we get into the scenario, bring that stuff up where it fits in each category. Um, so Alyssa, go on ahead and yeah, somebody on the YouTube answered the question that somebody on the YouTube had about where to access this slide deck. It is on the public meeting calendar, Delaware public meeting calendar, and click on the link for this meeting and you can find it there and follow along. Okay, Alyssa, next slide, please.
Sure. We did have Sherry wanting to make a quick comment.
Quick comment? Okay, go ahead.
For the buildings that have been selected as primary voting locations on July 7th, just the question, has come up because like my building's one of them. Do you foresee public health putting out some recommendations based on where we are that schools can use to make sure we're following proper protocols for cleaning on days like that based on like the scenarios that we saw a couple slides ago?
I'm not sure, but that's a good point to make, and I'll bring it up with the Department of Education's leadership so we can talk further on that because that is coming before you know it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, next slide, please. So into the facilities part, we have one slide of do now, we have 3 slides of before school opens, and we have one of when schools are open and operating. So committee, I'd like you to start thinking about these. If you have the slide deck at your home or wherever, your office, wherever you are, hopefully you've marked it up or you marked up the document that I sent ahead of time, which is exactly the same as the slide deck. Alyssa, go ahead and we've shown this for a few seconds. Let's show slide 14. Give it a little time. So everybody take a look at that one. All right, let's go to 15. Uh, 16. And 17 is a real short one. Okay, Alyssa, back us up to 13. And so committee, let's talk. What should be added to this list? Should anything be deprioritized or moved around? Did we miss the mark on some things? What are you thinking? And do this in the context of no to minimal community spread. Do we have any hands?
Dave Sokola first.
Yeah, one of the I also work in my other life in a fitness center, and they purchased a number of I guess freestanding units that you could put in a room in a fitness studio, for instance. That's an air handler that's designed to filter particles, and it works in addition to the central air handler system. Are we looking at any of those kind of things? Is that something that, especially if there's a classroom that might be smaller or with more people in it than we would be comfortable?
Well, let's see. How would we say that as a what to do? Explore air cleaning. Whatever.
I guess it was actually on the next slide where it talked about frequently changing air filters, and so it would probably be a subgroup of that one. So.
Slide 15, Alyssa.
Okay, yeah. So.
Yeah. So we have filters.
Yeah.
I think that is a good consideration for this level of exposure that we're talking about with minimal. But I think, again, when we get to the minimal to moderate, where there are going to be more instances of of the virus being out there, that there needs to be some consideration for the custodial crews on how they enhance their cleaning and their disinfecting, and that goes along with that area, in my opinion. But it is something that, we can't tell them how to do it, but that is something that we could suggest as part of the protocol for what they should be looking at. The difficult part, and I'm getting ready to switch to my budget hat, is that those air handlers, individual air handlers are very expensive when you start trying to outfit an entire building, if that was the decision, or individually, it still requires resources. And then, that's all things that we have to plan for.
Jeff, did you want to go ahead and make your comment?
Sure, and this is building a little bit on what Stacy asked and Andrew's response. So even though we're in the minimal spread, I've been listening to the governor, and one of the things he's been saying that I think is really important, the virus is still here. And that being the case, I'm assuming that even in minimal spread, there's going to be, like Andrew said, protocols are essential actions that we need to take. So in this area, when I looked at the sheet, Chuck, two things jumped out at me. One is, based on what those steps are that we need to take, I think we need to be able to identify and provide training to staff and not just assume that based on what they currently do, that they'll know how to address all the advanced cleaning requirements. The second thing is, depending upon the nature of the additional essential actions or protocols, we need to be able to assess with our current staff whether we're able to do everything we need to do to stay in the minimal spread scenario, recognizing that the virus is still among us, as well as their current work. So, I mean, clearly what we're talking about is adding on to what we do already, and I think it's important to know whether with our current staffing that we can get everything that needs to be done. So those are two things that, to me, I wasn't comfortable that they were clearly addressed here.
Thank you. And as you said that too, I thought about your custodial training, ensuring that our folks who keep our buildings clean and our kids safe through cleaning the building are well trained in what to do and how to do it in this environment. So thank you. Do we have another hand for facilities?
We do. Mike and then Dave again. So Mike, go ahead.
Actually, I just answered my own question by looking at the slide. So I was going to talk about the facial coverings. I just read it here. But it's something that we are going to recommend whether they should be worn or not. Is that something that we're going to talk about providing to the schools so that they can make them available should somebody not have one on a certain day that they come to school? Things like that.
I don't know that we go as far as to say whether they need to be worn or not. That might be the public health folks who do that. Andrew, you chime in if I'm off the mark on this.
No, you're right. I was just going to add, Mark, that those kind of protocols, going back to Stacy's question and Jeff's follow-up, are protocols that are going to be established both by the wellness working group and public health, and probably ultimately, considered at the executive level. And so I think as it pertains to this committee, the big question is going to be about procuring those things, right? And making sure that, the supply chains are robust enough that we can access the right kind of soap and hand sanitizer and tissues and touchless trash cans, right? All of these things that we know the CDC is recommending to prevent spread. And so, I think as it pertains to specific protocols like facial coverings, you'll start to see the working group that's focused on wellness make some specific recommendations and then do so in coordination with public health. It occurs to me that one thing that would be really helpful, Chuck, moving forward is is we should make sure this working group sees what the other working groups are reflecting on and talking about, so that they can consider the kind of protocols that the wellness folks and public health folks are considering, because there's so many implications for operations, things like procurement included. So for next week, let's plan to make sure that everyone on this working group has access to the conversation that's happening across the other two. Mike, does that help?
Absolutely. That's kind of the path I was actually trying to go down. I worded it wrong, but what you said exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
So, and just to piggyback on it, I think it is absolutely part of our charge dealing with operations is to figure out how to do this. When I think about operation, I'm thinking about resource allocation, and whether that's human, technology, training, buying the equipment that we need. That is something that we have to take a look at from an operations standpoint. So I think that's critical to do that.
All right. Thank you. Senator Sokola.
Yeah, actually, I had just forgot to put my hand down, but I did have a comment subsequent to that. And it occurred to me that the supply chain issues, as was previously discussed, could be pretty significant around things like air filters and the like. And those would clearly be legitimate CARES Act expenses. And between Newcastle County and the state, we should not hesitate to ask for funding for those things. That doesn't mean we're going to be guaranteed to get it, but I know there are some things that people are asking for that currently we can't use, like we can't supplement revenue lost with CARES Act funding. So to the extent that any of these things, especially the members of our subcommittee who are in that area, who know how much things cost, if you feel like we need something, we should ask for it. And I think that we should be able to put together a budget and figure out just how much of it we can afford. I think if you go back to the scenarios on slide 10, the middle one is what happened in 1918. And that's what everybody seems to be afraid of happening here. You come back with a vengeance in the fall. And to the extent that facilities, I mean, we have technology, we have cleaning agents, we have air handlers and things like that that should be able to mitigate to a degree some of that. And I would hope that we don't spare expense for things to try to minimize that second wave in the fall.
Agreed. Understood and agreed. Even if we can go back as normally as we can in the fall, there's always going to be that cloud over our head. Hey, what if it comes back? And that was definitely one of the scenarios that we looked at in Andrew's part of the presentation. Any more hands up for facilities?
Yes, we have Jeff and then Mike again. So Jeff, go ahead.
I'm following the senator. I just forgot to put my hand down. Sorry.
Okay.
And then off we are to Mike.
I'm with Jeff. I forgot to put my hand down too.
Okay.
Then we're good.
Before we move on to operations, another chance for facilities. And again, just to remind the folks on YouTube, if you would like to give us your feedback, if you go on the Delaware Department of Education site under reopening, you'll see an email address and a phone number. And we transcribe any comments from both of those and make it available to all the committee members. So we appreciate the input that you can give us on these. If no more hands for facilities, let's move on to next slide, or slide 18, operations.
I have one for facilities real quick. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just thinking about it, what we're talking about now is bringing kids back to school, but a majority of our facilities are used for the public. And so there may need to be some thought about facilities use and, how we allow that or restrict it in whatever way is necessary. Because, at least with my district, we use our facilities for a lot of community things. but that may knock heads with the necessity to be able to clean the facilities and keep them disinfected. So that's something else that is going to have to be thought about by the facilities people.
Yeah, would that be a do now or before school opens? What would you think?
I think that is a discussion that needs to be before school opens. Decision makers need to, have a plan for, are they going to allow facilities use? I know we're going to be talking about athletics. We have people use athletic fields also. So we got to figure out, that's something that needs to be discussed before you open the schools, because once the schools open, and it's just my opinion that people are going to say we're normal, and then everybody's going to rush to start doing the things that they were always able to do. And that may not necessarily be the case.
Great point. Okay, let's go to slide 18. And we're about halfway through our time, so I think we're doing all right. We have 3 more major areas. One of them doesn't have a whole lot behind it. So operations. So let's take a look at this do now slide for a few seconds here. Okay, next one, slide 19. Slide 20. Now we're at before school opens. '21, also before school opens. And 22, it's another before school opens. And 23 is a short one. All right, Alyssa, would you go back to 18 and then see if we have any hands up for operations?
We do. Stacy, go ahead.
Hi, so I have a question, I guess, on the, as I mentioned before, this staffing piece and the student piece with the pre-existing conditions, or obviously of any that occur. We have attendance policy in the state. So, and I know it says review new attendance policies on the next page. So is that part of, I know in some places regulatory flexibility and having conversations about that is part of operations. So I'm wondering if that is part of what we're looking at, or is that going to be recommended and open to the LEA, or is it still, because it's also federal, I understand, so.
Well, if it's on this list, it's something we can recommend, but I think what we're recommending is actions such as examine or look at your policies, or explore, determine whether we need some kind of even temporary regulatory or legislative fix. So if that's something that you note, then yeah, just make that suggestion to this group that we add it. And
Okay. So I absolutely do. for attendance, seat time, instructional delivery, especially for some of our students and staff.
Right. And, and some may think that belongs to another group. It may, but I think it also impacts this group because we have budgeting under operations, and we have our unit count process, which depends on attendance in the last days of September. And what if attendance is different because you have a student with a medical situation, and this, it might be, are we providing homebound or in the traditional sense, or what? So we do have to of our at least our unit count.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think as we try to give some guidance on all of this, a main thing that has been sticking with me is the need for regulatory flexibility. And so it's encouraging that we have legislators on here that can help with making the guidelines when it comes to purchasing or hiring staff a little bit flexible in these situations. An example would be hiring staff. You know, they're required for criminal background checks, but if we need a lot of staff, you know, do we have to wait for them to actually get the background check done? When it comes to purchasing, there's, certain money can only be used for certain things. You know, will we be allowed some more flexibility to meet the needs and the challenge of all the equipment and things that we need? So regulatory flexibility is a big thing for me that kind of runs through all of the scenarios on us trying to bring the resources to make this stuff happen or make recommendations on how they can make it happen.
Yeah, and assessing that need is probably a do now. Definitely. Alyssa,
Yeah, that's my feeling.
Agreed. Any other hands, Alyssa, on operations?
Dave Zakola.
Yeah, thank you. Oliver, that was a great point. I know the governor did a lot on regulatory flexibility during the executive order time for medical people, and I would hope he would do something along the regulatory flexibility for other professions that do need some assistance. I'm thinking, not only is there a lot of expertise out there, like you said, Chuck, when you were doing your opening remarks, there's a lot of expertise being developed around the world. And we certainly will have opportunities to see what's working and what didn't. And for instance, South Korea had to close schools after they opened them, a month or so ago, a couple of months ago, maybe. And we probably ought to have somebody trying to find out if there's anything they did wrong that we can learn from, so that we can do the. And yesterday I went to the dentist, and today I went to get a haircut, and both times I got my temperature taken in order to get into the door. So I don't know if we have any plans around that for either students or for staff or substitutes or whatever. But those are the kinds of things that people are kind of thinking about now, and I don't know if that's on one of these, but that's another issue that's certainly going to come up.
Yeah, monitoring other people's lessons learned, and doing some kind of a after action review or hot wash on what we've done to see what we've learned from our own experience. Those are some definitely in the operations area, and I'm sure the other two groups could probably use an item like that in their recommendation. It's good points. Alyssa, any other hands for operations?
Yes, a couple. Representative Postals.
Yes, on page 20, we have verify student and staff handbooks and planners and that kind of thing. We may be able to do that before school opens. I mean, we normally do that, but I think we might want to make note that there might need to be an addendum or some additional things that would be available that would be kind of some of the things you put in a handbook as time goes along, because surely we won't be able to make all those decisions necessarily, before August sometimes when that would be printed. So I think that needs to be done, but I think we also need to be nimble enough to say there may be an addendum or additional information that would be presented to student and staff once we get to opening stage.
Great. Thank you.
Andrew, go ahead.
I have a question for the group. It is based on something that we've been hearing across states, across the country, and it has so many implications for operations. And so the question is, does this set of guidance go far enough in providing framework for folks at the local level to think through how to manage students that don't return because they're opting out, staff members that don't return because they're opting out, and staff members who might not return because they are a member of a vulnerable population and potentially need an alternative accommodation. That is something that has consistently come up for us, and I just want to make sure that this is robust enough guidance for folks at the local level to think through those three scenarios: kids opting out, staff opting out, and potentially needing a alternative accommodation. And we talked a little bit about students needing an alternative accommodation earlier. So just want to throw that out to the group for thoughts and consideration.
Yeah, that's a good one too. I mean, because what do you do when some of your staff say, I can't come back? That's a HR quandary right there. So it's do we have an item in here where we discuss that or assess it ahead of time, or do we coordinate on it? So that's a good point.
I think it's part of the conversation that our HR people have to kind of look into, because there are numerous types of leave that come into play, and how and when they get enacted and what guidance we give is going to be critical to trying to address the staffing needs, just in a normal situation. And this is extraordinary. So I think that is something that I'd ask Gerald and the HR people to kind of really focus on impacts on leave and short-term disability and things of that nature, because this cart can get rolling pretty fast.
I'm sure the HR group can give us, a few bullet points to put in this document, definitely. Alyssa, any other hands on operations?
Yes, we have several. Sherry, go ahead.
I think one of the things I would appreciate if we could kind of just have people make note, we are in a teacher shortage anyway, but to look at issues related to reciprocity for licensure, and potentially having to look for any of us that have ARTC candidates, looking at some flexibility with extensions and timelines. Again, just kind of looking at scenarios of who may come back and who may need to be in your building and who may need to fill a seat. I think the more flexibility we have with hiring, the better.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Stacy.
Actually, yeah, I was going to say something about the credentialing. I know they did that in the health field, but I think that's important too. Sort of like Sherry was just saying, and also to look at the class size and the exceptions that are that we need to do around that base, if even in the typical return. So if I can just say again, for the flexibility, I do think that we need to have a process, and I would recommend that we have a process and the criteria for speed in all aspects, attendance, seat time, procurement, testing, instructional delivery, evaluations, credentialing, everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next hand.
Jeff and then Gerald. Jeff, go ahead. Oh, there we go.
Staff, I'm sorry. Go back to the conversation about staff who may not return. I think that's a really important area to call out, and that needs to be a now rather than before school thing. A lot of people have been talking that the jobs we do now may not be the same jobs we're doing, or the jobs we did before the pandemic struck may not be the jobs we continue to doing. And assessing or identifying who people are and thinking what alternative work they could do. Even in this sort of an environment, if we, as Stacy and others have said, can't bring everybody back because we're trying to stay in a minimal spread scenario, there may still be some, maybe not all, but some remote learning or some supports to the in-person instruction. And you may have staff who may be compromised so that you don't want them in close proximity to students, but they may be able to fill some modified role. And I worry that if we wait too far along in the process, we may not have enough time to identify how to modify or change those roles. And also getting that in place, I think, would serve us well if for any reason we return to any of the scenarios. And I know Senator Sokola called out the scenario of the follow-up in the fall, but the one that really scared me when I saw this was the Pekin Valley scenario, because it suggests to me that what we've gone through recently, we're likely to experience 2 or 3 more times in the next year to year and a half, unless I misread that. And if that's the case, we got to get better at what we've been doing the last 2 or 3 months to make sure we can deliver services to children, to families, and also support the educational employees who are trying to do the work in a rapidly changing environment that is very much unfamiliar to them. So I would encourage us to somehow take what I said and wordsmith it and prioritize it.
Outstanding points. Thank you. Thank you. Next hand.
Gerald, go ahead.
Basically, what I wanted to say is, has already been said. I know the HR directors, we meet weekly to discuss these issues as it relates to what the classroom is going to look like, how we're going to staff the classrooms when we don't know what they may look like. We know what they look like now, but there could be some other considerations. So flexibility in terms of hiring, reciprocity is a good point. And also we've been in contact with our attorneys in terms of how to deal with issues if staff does not want to come back to work or if there's some other special needs they may have. So I think we need to address it more now than later. However, we want to know what it looks like now so we can properly address the issue.
Thank you. Great points. Do we have other hands for operations?
Andrew, did you have another one?
Sorry, I don't. Just didn't take my hand down.
I think we're good. Oh, wait, Gerald has another one. Oh, no, he doesn't. I think Jeff might, though. Go ahead, Jeff.
My hand up or down right now?
All right.
So let me take it. Is it down now, Alyssa?
Yes, it is.
It's hard to tell on the screen. I apologize.
No worries. We're getting a handle on these tools.
Good. All right. If nothing else for operations, just want to make sure everybody has a chance to add something if they'd like to before we move on. No other hands? Let's go on to transportation. So we only have 3 slides for transportation. Natasha, we're not trying to shortchange transportation. We know that if there's scenarios where there's more spread, transportation is going to be very critical because that's the first place where a lot of our students will see our educational employees every day. So let's look at this slide, 24. This looks just like planning and being aware of what you got. 25.
Sorry, hold on. There we go.
So it looks like we could use more on this one. So we welcome things from some items from the transportation sector if they have anything to add here. But then remember, this is minimal spread, but still. And then 26. All right. So let's go back to 24 and let's see if our committee members have any comments. Remember, we're looking for what should be added to the list of what we should recommend, what should be deprioritized or moved around. So, please go ahead and let's see if we have any hands for transportation.
We do. We're going to start with Andrew, then we have Natasha and Jeff.
So I have a question for the school. I have a question for the school leaders, and it is this suggestion of sort of inventorying worthwhile and useful? Is that data that you already have, or is it data that you don't have? Obviously, to make the kind of decisions across all of these essential actions, this data is going to be critical. But I'm just curious, at the school level, does this feel repetitive, or does it feel useful, meaningful to be able to think through the inventory of, things like how kids are arriving at school, whether it's by bus or walking, or their parents or someone is dropping them off. would just love to hear perspectives and thoughts on that.
Natasha, go ahead.
As far as the inventory, what we have now is what we have. We don't have money allotted for additional buses unless we were approved by DOE to get additional buses for this school year. So that's where we are. What we have is what we have to transport the students that we currently have. Some of my concerns are social distancing on the buses. Will we do split shifting? How will the students be transported to and from school? A lot of our routes are double. There's high school, middle school, and then we have our elementary. And in my district, we also have our special needs programs. So we have students just like very much like the consortium. Will we do multiple trips? We are already in a driver shortage. I heard someone mention that earlier with the staff shortage. We are also in a bind with driver shortage. I'm concerned with drivers that are of a certain age, that also have extenuating health issues, and contractors that may want to opt out and get rid of their routes because they are afraid to come back. These are some of the questions and concerns that I've been getting from some of my people who may be at high risk. Some of them may be caring for their elderly parents. Some of them have autoimmune disease, and it's just a lot of fear going on through the community, and rightfully so. I'm not sure what will happen in the class, like on the buses, as far as I'm not in favor of like plexiglass or a shower curtain around the driver because that's a safety issue. How are we going to keep our drivers safe? How are we going to keep our students safe? Will the students wear the mask? Students are younger. Will they be able to keep their mask on their face? It's just so much that goes on the bus before we get them to school. It's a lot. With transportation, we can have about 10 things. There's so much that goes on with just getting them to and from school before they even get to school. The discipline on the bus, without the whole pandemic, what we have is discipline on the buses, and students can't sit next to certain students for whatever reasons. If a parent says, well, I know that this person's been doing X, Y, and Z, and I know that they may have this or that, and they've not taken the necessary precautions during this pandemic, and I don't want my child sitting next to them, and we face those things also on the bus. Cleaning the buses. Are we going to have to clean in between every run? Will time be allotted at the school level to get these buses clean? There's a shortage on cleaning supplies. There was, at least before we went out in March. It's just so much that goes into transportation. We're like our own entity. But the main concern is a lot of my contractors and drivers are of the age of the high risk age, and they are very fearful.
So Andrew, it might not be so much inventorying the buses, but taking a look at your driver fleet, whether it's district hired or contracted drivers, seeing who's coming back and trying to get maybe it's a due now to see, what are we hearing out there. I've also heard some folks talk about, to assess whether some parents are willing to actually drive their kids to school and to kind of lighten the population on the buses. Some parents may be willing and able to do that. And I've seen that in some other plans for some different states too. So that might be something to look at. Natasha, did you have anything else to add at this point?
Yeah, Chuck, as far what you just said about the parents opting to transport their student, that is an option if they opt to do so. And I hate to throw this out there, but I'm going to say it. Maybe we can offer them a stipend for doing so, because if they are eligible for transportation, they're eligible. If they opt out of using the bus, that's their prerogative as a parent. But maybe we could offer the stipend, which is like the 40 cents a day, like the 40 cents a mile rather, that's an option. It depends on the district, what the districts want to do, but I can see, I don't know,
I think, yeah, I agree that all of those things, I mean, it can be a daunting task on any of these areas, but I think we're starting to get down into the how to make this work. And I think we need to focus on the what. And I think inventorying the buses should go a little bit further. We have a lot of contractors that may not have been able to stay in business because of all of this. So we do need to know if they're still in business, and if they are, to what capacity can they fulfill what they were originally doing for us, because they may have lost drivers, so that whole scenario, I think the inventory of transportation assets and providers is key. I know we have a provider for homeless transportation and medical transportation in Sussex County, and they're like the only one. And hopefully they survive because they provide a lot of supplemental transportation for us. So I think the inventory and the capacity of what they can do is something that needs to be looked at as part of this process, and that is a do now. To find out if they're still in business or if they anticipate being in business when we come back.
Right. See, we have 18 more minutes and we got to get to technology, but I don't want to lose anybody else I know we're going to get deep into transportation and other scenarios. Who do we have? We have another hand?
Yeah, I've had my hand up for ages.
Representative Jakes, go ahead.
Yes. I said when we're doing inventory, we need to figure out how many children, especially in the high schools, are driving themselves.
Good point.
That has effect, and how we're going to take care of them, we're going to handle them, all that stuff. So. Okay, I'm off.
All right, thank you.
Jeff, go ahead.
So Natasha touched on this, but I think even in this best case scenario, it's likely there's going to be limits on our ability to transport kids in the numbers we did prior to COVID-19. So we need to have districts do some sort of assessment of routing and scheduling options.
Yes. Great point. Any other transportation hands up?
Stacy, go ahead.
I'm trying to think outside the box a little bit and of what I've heard. So maybe collaborating with DART. I know a lot of their buses aren't always full. I know in Sussex County, there's not a ton of routes, but maybe even looking at that, and it's early enough in the year as an option. I know all throughout the state, we're always searching for transportation is hard. Drivers, very difficult. And, so even right now, it would be helpful in a typical year starting out. So just, another thought would help the economy as well, I'm assuming.
Great thought. Okay, let's move on to technology. So Alyssa, would you go to slide 27?
Sure, and while I'm doing that, Representative Jakes, did you have another comment? I saw your hand go back up.
I couldn't figure out how to get my hand down.
You just click on it again and it goes away. And just double checking on Andrew as well. Did you have another comment, Andrew, or are you good? Okay. And I see, Liaga, I see you just raised your hand again. Did you want to make a comment?
I'm not sure where this would fit in, but just sitting here thinking about the students and the transportation and getting them to schools. Somewhere probably the question would be, as a parent, the students that get on the bus, they won't be monitored before they get to school. Are we going to get some feedback or some unhappy parents not knowing whether there's kids on the bus that their kids are riding with already have a temperature and won't know it until they get to school? And then that's a domino effect that if they are sick, do they question whether their kid's sick or not? And the other thing is, and I know in my area, and it's Indian River, and it is a large district, and you see mornings where you have 10, 12, 15 kids standing at a bus stop at a time, how will we manage that?
Right. Great point. Thank you. Thank you. What's, do we have another transportation?
I think that's it.
Okay, we can move on to technology, slide 27. A lot of this stuff is being done now, I think, already. So you'll see a lot of it has been operationalized. 28. Okay, 29. So now we're at before school opens. 30. And 31. And this is when schools are open and operating. Okay, Alyssa, take us back to 27 and then let us know. I know we have some hands on this one. I'm sure we do.
Yeah, we have Christine first. Go ahead, Christine.
Okay, so the do nows, are these for all the scenarios, like scenario 1, 2, and 3 as we go forward? Are the do nows the same for all of them?
Not necessarily.
So if we're in scenario 1 to survey the families about what devices they're using at home to support remote learning, I don't know if that's as necessary in scenario 1 as it would be in the other two, since we would be back in site environment. The third bullet down where it talks about developing a school technology plan to support the district plan, I think from my perspective, from the tech world, we would want to develop the district plan and give guidance to the schools so they're not coming up with all their individual plans, so that we could help them think through a process and give them some guidance, and it maybe needs to be broken out from an elementary setting to a secondary setting, depending how each district or school or charter develops their kind of technology and what they're using in their schools. Should I keep going through my slides?
Yep, keep going. Keep going.
Okay. So on 28, for a do now to assign a technology leader, publish that information on the intranet or internet. I don't know if that's necessary at this point and now as a do now. Maybe as the beginning of school or school opens, the school would want to release that information. But I don't know that that's a necessary action at this point in time. And when I was reading through the recommendations for all the leaders, the family device return leader, the staff return leader, I think there's too many. And to streamline it and to kind of ease confusion on the processes with collecting devices and fixing devices and returning devices, if there's too many people involved, stuff's going to get dropped, and we may there might be redundancy across lines. I know this is more of a national document, but within Delaware, we're governed by, like, our network's governed by DTI, and every district has a district or a lead technology person that would cover those last 3 bullets. So maybe not putting that on the schools, but knowing that that would be covered by their district technology lead or technology department. But definitely selecting an issue tracking tool, I think, is key in the whole process. On slide 29, appointing a family technology liaison. I don't know if I would want something about a parent organization to help fulfill this role. I was listening to one of the other work groups from earlier in the week, and some of the comments were that parents are being bombarded from information by all different avenues. So I would, my recommendation would be to have that come from the district or the school administration, or set out a district like if we were to send it from the superintendent or the district curriculum office or the principal, so that message is coming, that's streamlined from one person, so parents aren't getting multiple information from multiple sources at the school consistently. And then the only last thing that I had was, and I don't know where it falls, if it'd be before school opening or due now, but it doesn't talk about in here about assessing inventory of available devices. It does talk about collecting devices that may have been used during this current remote session. But one of the things that I know we're looking at here is what are we going to need to be prepared for the start of school? If devices were home with students, do we need to replace chargers? Assessing if we're going to have lost devices that we're going to need to replace for our on-site learning, even if we don't go remote, even things down to repair parts, just assessing what that looks like or what it might look like so we can start purchasing and procure those for August for an opening.
Excellent points. Thank you. Thank you. Alyssa, do we have any more hands?
We do. We have several. We'll start with Representative Postles and then Sherry, then Representative Jakes, then Andrew.
Thank you. I agree with several of Christine's first points on maybe not due now, but a little later on. One thing I think we might want to consider doing now, or at least sooner than a lot later, is inventorying or getting some kind of assessment on services that are available. There are places that are services not available. Certainly devices availability, devices is one thing, but service is another. For instance, you know, I don't have a landline available. I can't get dial up, and I don't have any cable, Comcast or any cable that goes by my house. And I live a mile from Route 1. So, I mean, I'm not terribly remote, but I know there are a number of places that don't have. I've heard that, you know, as much as 10 or 15 students do not have service availability, or it's very pricey and unreliable. We need to look at that. Certainly, as we would move into scenario 2 and 3, where that's we're going to have to rely on that, it's going to be important. But I think we need to start on that because that's going to take a little longer to fix, if you will. So that would be my comment there. Thank you.
Those are good ones too, and I think maybe it's when schools are open and operating, because we got to get school. You know, if there's minimal spread, we got to get school open. But once they're operating, then doing a reassessment of who has connectivity and affordable connectivity, so we can help to solve that problem. Just in case this comes back around, or just in case we've now shifted in the capabilities of teaching and learning. I mean, a lot of people agree that remote learning hasn't been wonderful, but you know, I would hope that we've learned a few things along the way that we could embed into regular learning to make it even better. Thank you. Alyssa, who's next?
Sherry.
I agree with Representative Postles. I think we need to look at broadband and we need to treat the internet like a utility. It's just as vital coming into your home as electricity and water in this scenario because it's what's connecting people to people. My district goes from the Bay to the Maryland border, and the more remote eastern and western parts of the district are the ones where we see this as a real struggle. So I would like to see us somewhere in this plan talk about reaching out to Comcast and Verizon about, like, again, are they doing an assessment of like where they can kind of create more opportunities for accessibility across the state. And I also think one of the things that should just kind of be part of on the radar is that districts should set up a tech hotline for families to call in. That's been pretty successful in the world of remote learning that we've lived in. And I think, you know, and that phone system is manned every day. And then the issues are farmed out to either the respective buildings or the tech, like someone in the tech department to handle. And I think that might help streamline some things for families that are struggling.
Thank you. Thank you. Next hand.
The next one is Representative Jakes.
Follow up on the same thing the last two callers talked about, is that we do have broadband deserts in our state right now. I know one of the things under CARES Act is the Department of Education and IT, we're trying to eliminate that, paying for towers and stuff. We need to know from them what their game plan, how long, and all that kind of stuff, so we can start building on that. That's my only comment.
Great, thank you. Next hand.
That's all of them. Oh, wait, Dave just put his hand up. Dave Sokola.
There we go. Yeah. So we in the Bond Bill Committee meeting in March, the IT people did have the plan to pretty much fill in all the broadband deserts statewide by the end of this year. That was the report we got in Bond Bill. And in the CARES Act, there was $14 billion nationwide for broadband alone. And I was told that that will help us expedite that. I wasn't given a date, but I do know they are still working on that. It certainly isn't done yet. Hopefully they will be done by the time school starts or by the time schools get shut down again, if that happens. So, we're not there. But there is an effort to close off those broadband deserts and give everybody access, or certainly quite a few more people access than currently have it.
And that's absolutely awesome. And once we conquer availability, we'll have to conquer affordability so we can get the Sherry vision of it being like a utility. Thank you. Any other hands for technology?
Yeah, Chuck, just going back to page 27, where it talks about, if possible, include training and support. One of the things that we've heard throughout this entire situation is everybody feeling like we could have been better prepared and better trained. So again, even in the best case scenario, I think it would be in everybody's best interest to do some sort of an assessment and of training needs and identify and maybe develop training. We've heard that a lot throughout the process, and we know that the ability of the districts to do it has varied across the districts. So if we could somehow have an approach to identifying what those needs are to support educators, and it's not just simply, I know in some of this, one of the things I always worry about technology is the ability to set up and know how to use the technology, but also the support in learning how to apply it to the instructional process and to use it to engage students. So I would suggest we consider that as not something that's possible, if possible, but it's necessary, and we should be looking at doing that sooner rather than later.
I actually think before this even happened, that has always been a priority. I think the difficulty for teachers and staff is that they have multiple trainings and things that they have to learn to educate students. So it's really a question of time when they can do it, and how does that measure up as a priority compared to all the other trainings that are required of them. So again, it gets to probably the regulation, and can some of those other required trainings be pushed back? And if this is a higher priority, so it is something we need to consider.
And Oliver, I think that relates back to something you said earlier is, what are the regulations we need to consider getting some relaxed approach on to allow us to prioritize what we need to do to be prepared to reopen schools and to hopefully provide educational services for the foreseeable future until the virus is no longer amongst us, right?
Yeah, that's right. All right. Any other hands, Alyssa?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Well, if anybody pops a hand up, we'll give them the opportunity to speak, but go on to slide 32, and then Oliver will take us home.
Oh, I get to go home. Okay. Next
You get to be
steps.
the hero.
I think I talked too much already, so I know probably people are ready to go home. Our next meeting is going to be next Thursday from 5 to 6:30. That is June 11th. We'll talk about scenario number 2, which is moderate community spread, and it'll be the main topic of discussion. There will be things that bleed over from this discussion, but that is where we're going to see the most need to kind of plan and address things in these areas. We will take back all feedback from this meeting and update the draft essential actions and reshare with this group prior to that next meeting. A reminder that public comment will be accepted via email at reopeningideas@doe.k12.de.us, or you can leave us a voicemail at 302-735-4244. I think you're up, Chuck.
All right. Thank you. Stay well, and we'll keep in touch. Thanks and have a great evening. The meeting is now adjourned.